against scams. And from the foreign scene, Colombia's outgoing president repeats vote fraud claims days before handing over power. And in sports, Nigeria Football Federation releases electoral guidelines ahead of 2026 Executive Committee elections. We have details of these and other stories coming up in a moment. I am NYAKNNO, Albert. And now in full, beginning from the presidency. President Bola Tinubu is anticipated to take the next step in Nigeria's proposed policing reforms on the 3rd of September 2026, when the draft of the National Policing Bill is scheduled to be presented to him for approval. The Chief of Staff to the President, Femi Gbajabiamila, revealed this yesterday while briefing newsmen at the State House after a meeting of the Presidential Working Group of the National Policing Bill. According to Gbajabiamila, the approved work program is a 7-week milestone-driven exercise running from the 27th of July to the 14th of September 2026, with legal drafting, policy research, data analysis, and implementation modeling taking place simultaneously. He said the final package would go beyond a single bill and include schedules, an explanatory memorandum, a legal audit, a consequential amendments matrix, clause-by-clause analysis, a state readiness framework, a fiscal and implementation note, an implementation work plan, a validation report, a risk register, and a controlled digital archive. On the national scene, the Senate Committee on Public Accounts has issued a 72-hour ultimatum to the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, the Central Bank of Nigeria, the Niger Delta Development Commission, the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, and other agencies to appear before it over their failure to appear before them to respond to audit queries. The directive was issued during the committee's meeting yesterday after officials of the invited agencies failed to appear, with no formal explanation for their absence. Chairman of the committee, Senator Ibrahim Dankwambo, said the invitations were part of the committee's oversight responsibilities and efforts to streamline its workload. Expressing displeasure over the agency's absence, committee members Senator Babangida Hussaini described the action as disrespectful to the National Assembly. Following deliberations, the committee resolved to give the affected agencies a final 72-hour ultimatum to appear before it on August 6th, warning that failure to comply could attract further legislative action. Away from that, the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited (NNPCL) retail outlets have reduced the pump price of premium motor spirits (PMS), popularly known as petrol. This means that NNPCL filling stations have reduced the petrol price by 36 naira per litre, coming 2 days after Dangote refinery-backed MRS filling stations reduced their petrol price by 14 naira to 1,265 naira per litre. The move by MRS filling stations had put other Nigerian filling stations dispensing petrol at around 1,300 naira and 1,310 naira per litre under pressure to reduce their prices. Still in the news, the Nigerian Educational Research and Development Council (NERDC) has renounced the fake document circulating in the public domain requesting financial support for the production, printing and nationwide distribution of the revised basic education curriculum for the 2026-2027 academic session. The Executive Secretary of NED, Professor Salisu Shehu, described the alleged correspondence as fictitious, frivolous and unauthorized, warning government agencies, educational institutions, development partners and members of the public to disregard it. In a disclaimer he personally signed in Abuja yesterday, Professor Shehu said the council had not issued any letter or document seeking financial assistance from any institution for the production, printing or distribution of the revised curriculum, with the disclaimer issued as the federal government intensifies reforms to improve learning outcomes to reposition Nigeria's basic education system under the Renewed Hope agenda. Shehu explained that the council had already made adequate arrangements for the production, printing, dissemination and distribution of the revised curriculum through the appropriate federal and state education authorities, agencies and departments, stressing that there was no need for any institution or individual to solicit financial support on behalf of the council for the exercise. The NERDC boss called on government agencies, educational institutions, development partners, stakeholders, and the general public to ignore any correspondence purportedly issued by the council requesting financial support for the curriculum, assuring stakeholders that all authentic information relating to the revised basic education curriculum would only be communicated through NERDC's official channels. You're listening to Global News on Memories 96.5 FM. More reports after the break. Do stay with us. Tuned to Global News on Memories 96.5 FM. And now to the rest of the news. On the foreign scene, Colombia's outgoing president, Gustavo Petro, has repeated allegations that June's presidential election was rigged, rejecting the legitimacy of his right-wing successor, Abelardo de la Esprella. Speaking to newsmen in Bogota yesterday, the left-wing Petro claimed that programmers had altered thousands of tally sheets after counts were transmitted to the National Election Agency. He alleged that the election was unclear and had been manipulated by foreign powers, and that metadata associated with vote tallies was not made available for review. Colombia's electoral authorities and international observers have rejected the fraud claims, with election officials declaring in late June that De La Esprella, a conservative with a background in law, had defeated Petro's ally Ivan Cepeda by 250,000 votes. De La Esprella is due to be sworn in before Congress on Friday, with some analysts saying the allegations could weaken his standing with some voters and deepen Colombia's political polarization. In sport, the Nigeria Football Federation (NFF) has officially released the guidelines and rules governing the conduct of its 2026 elections, paving the way for the emergence of a new executive committee that will oversee Nigerian football for the 2026 to 2030 cycle. The publication of the electoral framework follows months of anticipation after the NFF Extraordinary General Meeting held in Yenagoa, Bayelsa State on the 23rd of March 2026, where delegates unanimously approved amendments to the Federation Statutes, Electoral Code, and Standing Orders of the General Assembly. The Federation stated that the reforms are aimed at strengthening transparency, accountability, and governance within the country's football administration, while aligning the electoral process with evolving best practices and the governance principles expected by FIFA and the Confederation of African Football, CAF. The revised electoral code establishes a 12-member electoral structure with 2 nominees selected from each of Nigeria's 6 geopolitical zones and subsequently ratified by Congress. The nominees were constituted into 2 independent bodies, the Electoral Committee and the Electoral Appeals Committee. The Electoral Committee is responsible for organizing, conducting, and supervising the elections, while the Electoral Appeals Committee will hear and determine complaints, petitions, and appeals arising from the electoral process. That's Global News on Memories 96.5 FM, but before we go, let's take a recap of the top stories. President Bola Tinubu is anticipated to take the next step in Nigeria's proposed policing reforms on the 3rd of September 2026, when the draft National Policing Bill is scheduled to be presented to him for approval. The Senate Committee on Public Accounts has issued a 72-hour ultimatum to the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, the Central Bank of Nigeria, the Niger Delta Development Commission, the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, and other agencies to appear before it over their failure to appear before them to respond to audit queries. The Nigerian Educational Research and Development Council (NERDC) has renounced the fake documents circulating in the public, requesting financial support for the production, printing, and nationwide distribution of the revised basic education curriculum for the 2026-2027 academic session. And from the foreign scene, you heard that Colombia's outgoing president Gustavo Petro has repeated allegations that June's presidential election was rigged, rejecting the legitimacy of his right-wing successor Abelardo de la Espriella. The Nigeria Football Federation has officially released the guidelines and rules governing the conduct of its 2026 elections, paving the way for the emergence of a new executive committee that will oversee Nigerian football for the 2026-2030 cycle. The news this afternoon was edited by Mary Akpan and assisted by the production team. For views regarding our news or coverage of your newsworthy events, you can reach us on email newsroom@memoriesmediang.com or call our Newsroom hotline on 0909 000 0581. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Memories965FM and listen to us from anywhere in the world on Radio Garden at Memories 96.5 FM. Log on to our website at www.memoriesmediang.com. And now let's take you down memory lane. On this day, 1961, the 44th President of the United States, Barack Obama, was born. That's the news. Thank you so much for listening. I am NYAKNNO, Albert.